Many of you have been practicing for quite some time. I can kind of tell, right, by how quiet the room was during the sit. That was very nice. Thank you. And so you might not remember, but at the beginning of our practice, and maybe this still arises, but in the beginning of practice, it sometimes feels like our difficulties are getting worse. Like we start this practice thinking it's going to make things better, and yet we start noticing all these troublesome experiences and things that aren't quite right. And so it seems like our suffering is actually increasing. And part of us recognizes that because with practice we are no longer hiding from the difficulties, we're no longer hiding from ourselves, no longer like constantly distracting ourselves with whenever something uncomfortable arises, just trying to do whatever we can to not experience it. And of course, a big part of mindfulness practice is also learning to become tuned in and maybe more sensitive to what it is that we're experiencing. All of our experiences, not just the pleasant ones. So for all of these reasons, sometimes in the beginning of practice, and maybe this continues with practice too, we start to feel like, wow, there's a lot of stuff here that doesn't feel so great. Maybe, I did have a student say to me, ignorance was bliss, because I just didn't see some of this, like maybe the deeper difficulties. And it's true, right? When we practice, we start to see things that we hadn't seen before. And not only that, and this is true with anything, any endeavor we want to do. If we want to learn to sew, and we get the fabric together in the sewing machine, if we're using the sewing machine, and we start to see like, oh my goodness, it's so hard to get the lines that go straight and the tension right, and let alone reading a pattern or anything like this, right? So we just start to notice, all the ways in which sewing is difficult. So of course, in the way in which we practice, and if we have this idea that we want to have more freedom, more ease, we just start to notice everything that isn't freedom. We start to notice everything that isn't ease. This just naturally happens whenever we're trying to learn something new, or we have a expectation or a goal or a direction in which we're headed. Of course we notice that everything that seems to be going wrong, that's preventing us from going that direction or achieving that goal. So we start to see some of our limitations, maybe. Some of in meditation practice, maybe some of our fears start to come up, or some of these inner conflicts that we might have, or confusion, or sensitivities that we might have. So then we might, when these things arise, of course, we fall into some of the habits that humans have when they meet some of these difficulties. Blame. It's got to be somebody's fault. Sometimes it's our own fault, and we have a whole story of somehow why we are inadequate, or if only we could do X, Y, and Z better, if only we had A, B, C experiences, right? The list is endless. We blame ourselves, or we blame others, right? And wow, we have a whole media is all about who can we blame, right? There's so much kind of societal support and pressure for let's just blame somebody. Let's just blame somebody. And that kind of distracts us from the discomfort of when we see some of these frailties or fears or sensitivities that we have. Maybe we don't we have this sense of frustration, or maybe I don't need to go into all these long lists. I think many of us are familiar with them without my having to list all of them. But just this recognition that we might have some difficulties. Maybe it's we have an idea of how we want our life to be, or who the person we think we want to be. And then we see a gap between how our life is or how we are. Feels uncomfortable. Maybe we blame somebody, and then we don't even notice like the blaming itself is uncomfortable. First, maybe it feels good, right? We get to have this righteous indignation, and how dare they, and I can't believe it, and they should have done this, but then we're not noticing necessarily like how our heart and our minds are just getting smaller and smaller and constricted, and there's no freedom there. We've set up a me versus you, us versus them, and that's not where the freedom is. So of course, when we discover that things are uncomfortable, then it just starts all over again. Well, it's just this uncomfortable feeling, we have this reaction, trying to push them away, get rid of them, or just go distract ourselves and have some other pleasant experience. So, difficulties. It's part of the human experience, of course. And maybe we can make a gross generalization and say that there's two types of difficulties, and this recognition that every human life without exception has periods when there are a lot of difficulties. No exceptions. We all think and hope that our life will be, but that's not the case. And so, two types. When we have these periods of difficulties or seasons of difficulties, one we might say is some difficulties are clearly problems that need to be solved. So there's something we can do, and we fix them. Maybe there's some situations that call for some compassionate action. I had anemia for quite some time, and I just didn't know. And it wasn't, until blood tests. I don't remember exactly what the occasion was. And like, oh, Diana, you are anemic. Like, oh, that explains a whole lot. Okay, I can take iron supplements. This is a problem, there's a solution, and this is what I do. I take iron supplements, right? So there's those kind of problems that are kind of straightforward and maybe aren't too complicated, and there's some action that we can do. But many of our problems aren't like that. So many of them are, some of what I've been pointing to are problems that we're unknowingly creating for ourselves. We don't mean to. Of course not. But maybe there's this way in which we're insisting or struggling or wrestling with life and demanding that it be different than how it is. That's painful. It's can be never-ending. This trying to make things be different than how they are, in this way in which we're kind of like shoving things aside and insisting that things be different. Or maybe there's a way in which I kind of getting so caught up in our point of view and not seeing the bigger picture, not seeing the harm that we're causing ourselves, let alone that which we're causing others. Okay, so I talked about some difficulties. Maybe it'd be helpful to talk about what can we do. The Buddha's, Four Noble Truths, the first is there is suffering. So sometimes it's just to recognize, okay, what are some of these difficulties that we are creating for ourselves, partly by insisting that things be different than how they are. So one is we can find freedom in the midst of the difficulties of our lives. I know for a long time I had this idea like, okay, my life is going to be better as soon as, all these other things are taken care of. Or, okay, I'll be able to meditate properly as soon as I'm no longer restless or tired or filled with desire or filled with aversion or don't have any confusion. As soon as this, as soon as that. And then, of course, those situations don't arise so often. We try, right? We are trying to create all the conditions so that we finally can meditate or find freedom, but we don't have to wait. In fact, for me, it was such a radical turning point in my practice. And part of it was when I was helping Gil Fronsdal. Gil, probably all of you know who he is. Create this book called Unhindered. And it's about the hindrances. And I helped kind of create that book and edit it. And so much, the whole book essentially is about how to be with difficulties. And the answer was, kind of I can sum up this book, just be mindful of them as best we can, with this openness and spaciousness. So we could just bring awareness to our difficulties. I'm not saying this is easy, because I've went through all this beginning of this talk talking about how we're trying to push things away and we don't want to see them and we're trying to make them be different. But this mindfulness practice, kind of like bringing our attention back to our breath again and again and again, is exactly the practice that we need to help not turn away from difficulties, to help us be with them as best we can, as best we can. So it's often we have this idea there's only two ways to be with practices, or be with our problems, is to suppress them and deny them, or try to insist that they be different, or or maybe I could say, sometimes we have this idea we should just all our difficulties yell and express them and, make sure that everybody knows how unfair or it seems to us or angry. But this is pointing to this third one, this third alternative for being with our difficulties. And there's this story that Jack Kornfield tells in one of his books that I really like. And it's about the poison tree. So this poison tree, a tree that has poison fruit, and Jack in his book tells this story. I don't know if he created this story or if he got it from somewhere else, but that when some people, when they first discover this tree, they see, oh my gosh, this is really dangerous. This is really dangerous, this poison. So we better cut down this tree before anybody gets hurt. So they get out the chainsaws and cut it down. And this often is our initial response to difficulties. We got to get rid of it, and we're trying to create whatever way that we can. And so it's two approaches that I talked about just a moment earlier is either deny or repress it, or let everybody know about them, So often they're using one of these two approaches with this poison tree. But there's some other people that have maybe journeyed a little bit further along this spiritual path, and when they see this poison tree, they realize, oh, let's not cut it down. Instead, let's take care of the tree, take care of ourselves, take care of others. Let's put a fence around it, and we'll just protect people. We'll allow this poison tree to be there. but we'll just protect ourselves. And maybe that's a compassionate way to be with the difficulties or to be with the poison. And so this, in some ways, is a profound shift in our practice. Instead of like, gotta get rid of it, to like, no, it's okay, it can be there. And we'll just kind of like build a little fence around it. But then there's a third type of person, maybe who's gone even a little bit further in their spiritual path, and they see this poison tree, and they go, fantastic, here's a poison tree. Exactly what I needed. It's perfect, just what I was looking for. And they take out the fruit, and they work with it, and they take the poison, maybe extract it, and add it to some other things, and they turn it into medicine. Something that can be helpful for themselves and helpful for others. As an aside, I'll say maybe this is part of the reason why I like this story is that back when I was a biochemist at one of the laboratories down the hall, they were working with cobra venom factor as they were taking cobra venom and extracting one particular kind of like the active ingredient, and were using it and turned it into medicine that can help people. So this is sometimes what people do. But is there a way in which when we see poison fruit that we can pick the fruit, maybe not eat it, but investigate it, look at it, its properties, and treat it with respect and some understanding, and use this as a way to find more freedom for ourselves, and maybe we can help others too. So what are some ways in which we can maybe get a little bit more tangible or practical about how can we pick these poison fruits, quote unquote, and help them to be medicine and support for our practice? Some of you might know that here at IMC, like Gil and Tanya Weiser, they came up with this acronym RAFT, RAFT, something that can help us cross over some choppy waters, something that can help us get to the other side where freedom is. So R, just recognize what's happening. This is a poison fruit. This is a difficulty. This is a difficult emotion. This is not what I wish were happening. But is there a way that we can bring mindfulness to the experience? This is sadness, and it feels like this. This is loneliness, and it feels like this. This is anger, and it feels like this. Sometimes just recognizing and even using the label is helpful, because then we're not tangled up with it as much. There's a way in which there's a little bit more distance between ourselves and the experience. There's also a way in which when we label it or give it a name and just say, okay, this is, you know what, I don't even know what this is, but I feel out of sorts. And it feels like this. There's a way in which there's a honoring and respecting our experience. Honoring and respecting ourselves instead of like being dismissive like we often are, or instead of like blaming others or blaming ourselves. But just to recognize this uncomfortable experience is here. And of course, this is the first noble truth, there is suffering. This second letter, A, is for allow. Is there a way that we can make space for what is already here? It's already here. We're already experiencing it. Is there a way that we can allow it to be here? Kind of soften the pushing away that we habitually do. This is what humans do. Of course we do. We want to push away what's uncomfortable, and there's a way that this kind of allowing, even the intention to allow, is a way that we can interrupt the momentum, this habitual momentum of push things away. There's also a way in which mindfulness, just recognizing, being present for it, and allowing it as best we can, there's a way in which it can have a restraining quality. Maybe restraining is too strong of a word. It's a way, like, I kind of want to point to that's kind of like interrupting the momentum, so stopping the flow of maybe like some emotional experiences, for example, like anger. So, is there a way that we can, rather than having this knee-jerk reaction of getting rid of it, maybe we could just ask ourselves, is this something that really needs to be dealt with right now? Is this something that needs a response right now? We can allow it to be there, and by allowing it to be there, we can understand it better. If we want to work with something, if we want something to shift in our life, some difficulty, it helps to understand it better. There's a way that also is kind of respecting ourselves, respecting this is what's happening, and I have the capacity to hold it in such a way that maybe I can understand it. Have a little bit better understanding of what this experience is like. What are the conditions that help it arise? What does it feel like? When we come into contact with and allowing this experience and maybe feeling it, is maybe some compassion arises. Compassion arises for ourselves. This warm-hearted feeling, this warm-hearted recognition of, this is suffering, this is difficult, that's coupled with this warm-hearted wish for it to be different. And this wish for it to be different is not the same as shoving it away. It's more, compassion is this more warm-hearted quality. So allowing allows us to understand it, respecting ourselves, respecting their experience, some compassion to arise. And allowing it increases our capacity to be with difficulties. This is definitely something that's a skill that we have to train with. It's natural that we don't want to be with difficulties. So it's a skill that we can train. We might ask, well, why would we want to train with something like that? It's guaranteed that in our lives there will be difficulties that do not quickly end, maybe never end. People that we care about, people that we love, have illness or die. We have illness or die. We will die. We don't know when, we don't know how. Maybe there's world events that we have no control over and just really affect us. So there will be large difficulties in our lives that we can't control. So just practicing with some of these simple ones, learning how to allow even the minor irritations that arise when the person in front of you that's driving is going way too slow, when the line at the grocery store is going way too slow, when the person nearby is talking way too loud on their phone. these mild irritations is a fantastic place to practice. Okay, this is an irritation, and I'm going to just allow this irritation to be here as best I can. RAF, feel in the body, to the somatic experience of this. Often, frustration, anger, sadness, loneliness, all these things, there's a lot of stories associated with them, and there's a lot of, like we might say, baggage associated with them. And it's easy to do. Of course it is, kind of get lost in the conceptual worlds, or we kind of like generalize, like this is terrible and it's always going to be terrible and I'm always going to feel like this. And the best way to interrupt that, kind of like cut the stream or cut the cord, or I don't know what the expression is, stop the train on the tracks, is to feel it in the body. There's frustration and it feels like this. Maybe my foot is tapping, or maybe my shoulders are going up towards my ears because I just want it to be different. Dang it. There's sadness and it feels like this, of this real heaviness in the shoulders, and maybe this knot in the stomach and a lump in the throat. For all of us, it's different. We don't all have a physical association with these emotions, aren't always the same. Sometimes we're not even aware of what the bodily experience is. Physiologists tell us that there are physical experiences that accompany emotions. So this is part of mindfulness practice, is just to tune in and to be able to experience them. And it's a way to maybe stop the swirling that's associated with difficulties and to just feel them in the body. And there's this way that, kind of by bringing them into the body, that interrupts the flow. And by interrupting the flow, the train of thoughts or the swirling that might happen, there's a way in which we kind of like keep the experience, we might even say, in check. So it's not continuing to snowball into getting something bigger and bigger. And Ton Jeff writes that getting to know the emotion, including the bodily experience, is like trying to know the currents of a river, like that this emotions do have this, this momentum. And so even though like the surface may seem placid and calm of this emotion, when we start to feel it in the body, and then we kind of like are interrupting the flow that happens in the mind, then we start to notice, for a river we don't know how strong the bottom currents are until we try to dam it. And when we kind of like bring the awareness to the body, kind of like want to interrupt the flow of the emotion, then we really start to see, there is a real strong momentum, and there might all of a sudden all this rationalization might start to arise. So bringing it into the body not only interrupts the flow, but it might also make it more clear, like what are some of the ways in which some of the underlying maybe experiences that are supporting this emotion, for example. So RAF, recognize, allow, feel in the body. T, to tease apart the experience we're having, the difficult experience, from the reaction to the difficult experience. We might be filled with anger, and then we don't want to think of ourselves as an angry person, so we have aversion to the anger. And this aversion, in some ways, is getting all tangled up with the anger, and it's kind of like fueling the anger. This is so common so common in my role as a retreat teacher. Often when practitioners come and they're sharing how things are going in their practice, whether on retreat, they're seeing new things, they're understanding themselves better, their mind and their bodies are getting settled. But often they don't see, it's not so easy to see, like, okay, there's the aversion, we can see that, but often we don't see the second beat, the aversion to the aversion. Or the third beat, the aversion to the aversion to the aversion. So is there a way that we can tease apart? And often it's aversion to whatever we are feeling, and this aversion is a way tangled that kind of fuels and allows whatever it is to happen, whatever difficulty, emotion we're experiencing to continue. Often what we don't see too is the way that we might actually like the difficulty in some kind of way that's certainly not clear to us at the beginning, but we might notice that there's something about feeling enraged, feeling angry that we kind of like. Makes it feel powerful and makes us feel like we have a purpose, and we have this, gives us license to say and do whatever we want because we're angry. We're not noticing how taxing this is and what a toll it takes, not on us, but on those people around us. So we're not noticing the aversion, and we're not noticing the way in which we might like it. Or there might be a way in which we're feeling like really greedy, want more, I need more, I need more. But there might be the way in which we actually feel attracted to not only the object of whatever we're lusting after, wanting, greedy for, but there's this way in which we feel attracted to the feeling of really wanting something. Because it distracts us from something else, or again, it gives us a purpose or gives us a direction. I need this. Okay, I just have to get this. And we're not noticing how this constricts our lives. There isn't freedom there when we just feel compelled to go after something. Or the same way with anxiety. Maybe we, of course, nobody's going to say they want anxiety, but maybe there's a part of us that believes that, okay, if I just worry enough, I can make this problem go away. Maybe this is like underneath, it's not clearly in our minds, but we're loath to get rid of this belief that worry isn't helpful because we don't know what is helpful. We don't want this uncomfortableness to be there. So, to work with some of these difficulties, RAFT, recognize, allow, feel in the body, and tease apart the experience from our reaction to the experience. I'm offering these in this order because it makes a nice acronym. Doesn't mean we have to do this in this order. We start where we are. Maybe we've already recognized and we're just allowing, or maybe we're just feeling a lot of aversion and we just are teasing apart, like, oh yeah, this is aversion, and I have aversion to this aversion, or whatever it might be. But there is a way in which we can take these poison fruit and turn them into medicine. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying this is fast. I'm not saying this is a linear path. Do step 1, 2, 3, and you'll be finished. But I think you wouldn't trust these teachings too if I were to say, oh, just do this and everything will be fine. Easy peasy, right? I think we know this from life, that to undo habits to undo some lifelong beliefs, to undo what society pressures us to do. Not easy, not fast, but it's possible. It's possible, and maybe it's not as difficult as you think. Maybe it just starts with a mindfulness practice. Just being aware of what our experience is. Starts there. We start where we are. And it can start with that simple. So I think I'll open it up to some questions or comments. If anybody has something that they'd like to say or...
Hi, Diana. I really appreciate you talk about the RAFT again. I heard several times, but every time I heard it, is there different reaction I have. Today is so clear that everything makes sense, but when I get to the last one, I want to tease apart, but a lot of time, like you said, the version of the version, the third version, it's like really fast slip and slope. It just happened all at once. So when I look at that, usually it looks so solid, it's just one thing. I don't know what would be the skill to tease it apart. For example, this is probably not a good example, but one thing I'm struggling with is after the retreat, I realized my life has so much leakage of the time.
So much leakage.
Yeah. It just, suddenly the time is gone. But because I was doing things mindlessly, then I thought, well, there's a fine line. Do I treat my life as a project of improvement? Or I really have a purpose? I want to have dedicate most of the time, as much as I can, something I think is worth my life. There's a fine line there. So to tease it apart, again, I don't know how to tease that apart.
So you don't know how to tease apart. So there's a fine line between your life as it says you're leaking time, and that the kind of like it's a self-improvement project, right? That kind of idea. Yeah. And it wasn't quite clear to me what the other part was.
The other part is whenever I have an ideal situation, like in the retreat, I see my life is so clear. I know what I want to do. I know what I shouldn't do in my daily life, what I don't want to waste time on.
I see.
But when I come back home, I would fall back to that.
Yeah.
Then I don't want to represent myself too harshly, because I still have to live.
I see. Yeah, so while on retreat, you have some clarity and some inspiration and motivation, and then when you come back, after you've been off a retreat for a while, then like what happened? How can I keep this clarity? Yeah, right? This is a great question. So you said about teasing apart. So to tease apart, I'm not sure I understood, to tease apart what was the leakage of time, and your wish to be using your time as a support for practice. I would say, regarding teasing apart, anytime we're teasing apart, if it feels like, oh wait, this is too complicated, I don't know, I can't figure this out, I don't understand, then we could just say, oh, frustration feels like this. Instead of having to tease it apart, we just say, oh, we could recognize and allow frustration, or recognize and allow disappointment, recognize and allow confusion, or something like this. And then there you are, right in the practice again. And of course, life outside of retreat isn't the same as on retreat, right? Well, we want to have some of the same benefits, or yeah. Is that helpful? Yeah. Thank you, Lydia.
Thank you.
Just wanted to share a joke. I'm used to rain for dealing with the 5 hindrances.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh no, is it raft or is it rain? And then I thought maybe it could just be rafting.
Rafting.
Yeah.
R-A-F-T-I-N. Rafting.
Yeah, apostrophe.
Nice. We just need to come up with a G. What would be G? Give. Nice. Recognize, allow, feel, tease apart, investigate, nurture, and give. Rafting. I love it. Thank you very much. How many letters was that? It was 8 letters? The 8 factors of working with hindrances, or something like this. Nice, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, thank you for the talk. So I like the idea of RAFT, and in cultivating my own mindfulness practice, I do a lot of sort of inner exploration and things related to RAFT, which is helpful. I also recognize the sort of therapeutic value of like venting at times or sharing. And I kind of heard elements of that in like the types of people who tell everyone about the poison tree. Like, maybe I'm not going to turn it into medicine, but I'm going to tell everybody about it to keep them safe. And I just recently I've had a hard time. I've like felt this desire to sort of like not quite shout my problems from a rooftop, but sort of share or like put them outward and not explore inward as much on my own. But I also know that there's like a healthy balance. Like Sangha is important and support. And so just any words or ideas on sort of balancing this inward light and then outward dynamic?
Here's some ideas. And I appreciate that you said that Sangha is important. And sometimes we do connect, kind of like with our shared vulnerabilities, right? So like, here's some difficulty that I have, and it allows us to connect with others and allows for some intimacy.
And there's some release.
So, yes, and there's some release also, right? And maybe others have, some, even just being recognized by others can be really supportive. But I think the Buddhist teachings are pointing to that just allowing, or let's say, there's a recognition that we have habits of mind, and that if we feed habits of mind, they're just always going to stay. So there's value also in interrupting them as we can. So the Buddhist teachings would be opposite then of some go into, like there's some therapeutic modalities that suggest going into a room and like hit pillows or something like this. They're saying, oh, actually you're just increasing the amount of rage or whatever it is happening. So, and that's not connecting with another person, that's just venting, or something
Sure.
like that. So they would make a distinction. Is this helpful? Or what
Yeah. And so when you say habit of mind, that some people may have this habit of mind of this desire to share their problems. That's what I understood, or?
No, I was thinking about a habit of mind of like being angry. And so if we're just always expressing the anger, then we're just fueling the habit to be angry. It's just
Right.
easier and easier to be angry if we're always expressing it.
Mm-hmm.
And but sharing it with somebody else, or connecting with somebody else about this is not, that would be not, that's different. You're talking about the anger, you're not being angry towards
Expressing the
somebody.
anger,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're at the top of the hour, so thank you for your kind attention and for your practice. And if you'd like to speak or come up to me, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you.